The night I lost both my hands wasn't the worst day of my life. The real nightmare began when I came home, and my own family refused to open the door. They said I was no longer useful, no longer one of them. But when I knocked again, what my mother did next will make your heart tremble. Before we dive into today's story, imagine this: you have your whole life for people who left you the moment you needed them. Would you forgive them if they came back? My name is Alina, and I was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, a city known for its gray winters, factory smoke, and the quiet resilience of the people who live here. Life in our small, two-bedroom house on the east side was never easy, but I had learned long ago that complaining didn't change much. My father, Franklin, was a kind and patient man who used to work at a local machine shop until cancer took away his strength. By the time he was diagnosed, the bills had already started piling up, and my mother, Martha, seemed to lose whatever tenderness she had left. Our house was modest: beige walls, creaky floors, and the constant hum of an old refrigerator that sounded like it was sighing with exhaustion. In that small home, I was the only one who worked. My younger brother, Darren, spent most of his time playing video games or sleeping until noon. Yet, somehow, in my mother's eyes, he was the golden child, her pride, her only hope. Whenever she spoke about him, her voice softened. When she looked at me, her tone hardened like steel. I worked full-time at a food packaging plant downtown, operating sealing machines that closed pouches of frozen meals. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid enough to keep the lights on and my father's medicine stocked. Each day began before sunrise. I'd bundle up in my worn coat, grab a thermos of coffee, and catch the early bus. The factory air was always filled with a mix of steam, oil, and disinfectant. I was used to it, to the repetitive sound of conveyor belts, the click of sealing arms, and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights above my head. When I returned home, my father would usually be resting on his bed, a soft smile crossing his pale face as soon as he saw me. I'd sit beside him, feed him soup, and talk about work. He would always listen, even when he was too weak to speak. My mother never helped much. She stayed busy watching TV, complaining about bills, or scolding me for not doing enough. Darren would walk in demanding money, and if I hesitated, my mother would say sharply, "Give it to him, Alina. You earn more than you deserve anyway." Still, I didn't argue. I knew my father depended on me, and that was enough reason to keep going. Every dollar I earned, every late shift I took, was for him. Sometimes, after everyone fell asleep, I'd sit on the couch with my laptop resting on its silver stand, the one I had bought myself last year. It helped me relax. I'd watch a movie, take an online course, or simply escape for a while. That small routine was my only luxury, my quiet rebellion in a house filled with tension. I often wondered how long I could keep everything together. My father's health was fading, the bills were growing, and the bitterness inside this house was turning heavier by the day. But I kept telling myself one thing: as long as Dad is alive, I'll keep fighting. My father had always been a quiet man, the kind who measured his words and never raised his voice. Even when sickness drained the color from his face, there was a certain calmness in him, a gentleness that never left. One winter evening, as the wind howled outside and the smell of soup lingered in our small kitchen, he asked me to sit beside him. I noticed the documents spread across his bed: hospital bills, old insurance papers, and something new, a brown envelope sealed neatly with a lawyer's stamp. "Alina," he said softly, "you've carried this family on your shoulders. You've worked harder than anyone I've ever known. I don't have much left to give you, but what I do have, I want you to keep." I frowned. "Dad, please don't talk like that." He gave a faint smile. "Listen to me, sweetheart. You've earned this. That house, the only thing we have, it's yours now." For a moment, I didn't understand. My hands trembled slightly. "What do you mean, mine?" He nodded toward the envelope. "I met with a lawyer last week. It's done legally. The house is transferred to your name. Your mother and brother don't know, and I want to keep it that way for now. Promise me you'll say nothing until the time is right." Tears welled in my eyes. "Dad, you didn't have to." "I did," he interrupted gently. "You're the one who kept this roof over our heads. You took care of me when everyone else turned away. I want you to have a place that no one can take from you. I held his frail hand, trying to blink away the tears. He looked weaker than ever that night, but his eyes held peace, as if he had finally done something that gave him strength. When I left his room, I hid the envelope inside a small box beneath my bed. My mother had never been one to value honesty when it came to money or property. I knew that if she ever found out, she'd twist it into something ugly. And Darren, well, he already believed everything belonged to him by default. Days turned into weeks, and I went about my routine as always. I woke before dawn, worked long hours at the factory, and came home to care for Dad. He seemed to grow weaker each day, but there was a kind of quiet satisfaction in his eyes, like he had secured my future in a way no one else could. Sometimes, while sitting on the couch late at night with my laptop resting on its silver stand, I glanced toward his room and whisper, "Thank you, Dad." It wasn't just for the house. It was for believing that my hard work meant something. I had no idea that soon, the very hands that worked to keep us alive would be taken from me, and that my father's final gift would become my only refuge. It was an ordinary Thursday morning, the kind that started before the sun had even decided to rise over Cleveland. The air was cold and heavy with the smell of snow. I wrapped my scarf tighter around my neck, caught the early bus, and made my way to the food packaging plant where I'd been working for almost 3 years. The building stood like a block of gray concrete against the skyline, familiar, dull, and somehow comforting in its routine. Inside, the noise of machinery was constant. Conveyor belts hummed, sealing arms clamped, and the faint hiss of steam filled the air. I clocked in, put on my gloves, hairnet, and apron, and took my place at the sealing station. My job was simple but precise. I had to make sure every food pouch was aligned perfectly before the heat-sealing machine pressed down to close it. One mistake could jam the line and delay an entire shift. That morning, things felt a little off. The line supervisor was running late, and one of the sensors on the sealing machine had been flickering red intermittently since yesterday. I'd reported it, but no one had come to fix it yet. I told myself it wasn't serious. We were used to dealing with small malfunctions all the time. The hours passed in the same rhythm. Load, align, seal, repeat. Around noon, I noticed one of the pouches getting caught sideways between the conveyor edges. The sealing press was cycling on its own timer, and if I didn't fix it, it would crush the packet and stop the line. Without thinking twice, just like every other time, I reached forward to adjust it. The next few seconds felt like a blur. I heard a sudden hiss, followed by a heavy metallic click. The sensor must have misread the motion. The machine came down before I could pull back. A sharp pain exploded through my arms, a blinding, burning pressure that shot up to my shoulders. I screamed, but the noise of the factory drowned me out for a moment. Then everything went silent. Alarms blared, red lights flashed, and I could faintly hear someone shouting, "Hit the emergency stop." I remember looking down and seeing nothing but the silver edges of the machine pressing down where my hands should have been. The sight made my stomach twist. I couldn't feel my fingers, couldn't feel anything except the searing pain and the heat. 2 coworkers rushed toward me, pulling the emergency lever. The press lifted, but the damage was already done. Someone grabbed me under the shoulders while another shouted into a radio for the paramedics. My vision blurred as I heard the siren approaching from somewhere outside the factory. The next thing I remember was lying on a stretcher, my arms wrapped tightly in thick gauze, the smell of antiseptic mixing with my own fear. One of the EMTs said softly, "Stay with us, Alina. We're taking you to Metro Health." As the ambulance doors closed, I stared at the white ceiling above me and realized, with a cold shiver, that everything I had depended on, my work, my strength, my hands, was gone. When I woke up, everything felt distant, like I was floating somewhere between pain and silence. The white walls, the hum of machines, and the faint sting of antiseptic in the air were the first things I noticed. My arms were heavy, wrapped in thick bandages from the elbows down, resting on firm hospital pillows. A nurse leaned over me, her voice calm but distant. "You're at Metro Health, Alina. You're safe now. The surgery went well, but your injuries were severe." I didn't need her to finish. Somewhere deep down, I already knew. My hands, the ones that had carried groceries, washed dishes, cared for my father, and worked every day to keep our house alive, were gone. I felt the weight of absence, heavier than any painkiller could numb. Days passed in a blur of procedures, nurses, and quiet nights where the only sound was the slow beep of the monitor beside my bed. The doctors came and went, explaining things in words that floated past me like smoke. Thermal crush injury, amputation, rehabilitation therapy. None of it felt real. I kept hoping my mother would walk in, maybe even my brother, but no one came. I was alone, the same kind of loneliness I'd known all my life, only now magnified by helplessness. I thought of my father constantly. I imagined his face, how his voice used to soften whenever he said my name. I wanted to tell him that I'd be okay, that I'd somehow find a way to live with this. One morning, just as the nurses were changing my the hospital's social worker entered the room. She had a sympathetic look in her eyes, the kind people wear when they're about to deliver bad news. "Alina," she said gently, "your father passed away last night." For a second, everything stopped, the sound of machines, the movement of the nurses, even the air in my lungs. I stared at her, unable to speak. She continued quietly, "It was a heart attack. The doctors said it was sudden. I'm very sorry." The world around me blurred. My father, my anchor, was gone. The man who had believed in me when no one else did. The only person who ever saw me for who I was. I turned my head toward the window, and tears streamed silently down my face. Outside, snow was falling in slow, fragile flakes, as if even the sky was mourning. Later that evening, a nurse sat with me while I cried. She held a cup of water to my lips because I couldn't hold it myself. "You're strong," she said softly. "You'll get through this." But I didn't feel strong. I felt hollow, like something vital inside me had been carved out. My father's death left an emptiness that no surgery, no therapy could ever fix. Still, somewhere beneath that grief, a quiet thought began to form. He believed in me enough to give me a home. I have to survive, for him. The day of my father's funeral was bitterly cold, the kind of cold that seeped through layers of fabric and settled in your bones. The sky hung low and gray over Cleveland, and the trees outside the church swayed under the weight of winter wind. I stood near the front row, wrapped in a dark coat, my arms covered in sleeves that hid the ends of my bandages. People tried not to stare, but I could feel their eyes on me, pity, shock, and whispers that stung as much as the cold air. My father's casket looked simple, just the way he would have wanted. As the pastor spoke about his kindness, I thought about every moment he had lifted this family, when no one else would. When it was time for the final goodbye, I stepped forward slowly, the soft crunch of snow under my shoes echoing louder than the prayers. I couldn't touch the casket, but I bowed my head and whispered, "I'll keep your promise, Dad. I'll make you proud." After the burial, relatives and neighbors came to offer condolences. My mother, Martha, barely spoke. Her face was blank, her voice mechanical as she accepted their sympathy. My brother, Darren, stood off to the side, scrolling on his phone as if he were waiting for the day to end. Their indifference hurt more than the physical pain in my arms. When I finally returned home later that evening, the house felt emptier than ever. My father's chair by the window was still there, his reading glasses resting on the table beside it. The silence in that room felt unbearable. I sat for a while, remembering the sound of his laughter, the way he used to call me, his brave girl. Martha walked in, her tone sharp as always. "Don't start crying again," she said coldly. "Crying won't bring him back." Then she turned away, leaving me sitting in the quiet. That night, I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. I could feel the absence of his presence in every corner of the house. Everything that once made this place a home now felt like a reminder of what I'd lost. Still, somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice told me that my father's promise, the home he had given me, would someday become my strength. The weeks after my father's funeral passed slowly, each day blending into the next like a never-ending winter. I had returned to the same house, but it didn't feel like home anymore. The air inside was colder than the wind outside. Martha barely spoke to me, and when she did, her words carried the sharpness of a blade. Darren treated me as if I were invisible, or worse, an inconvenience. Most mornings began the same way. Martha would bang pots in the kitchen, muttering under her breath about bills, about how some people had stopped being useful. I'd sit quietly at the table, struggling to button my coat using what was left of my arms. Each simple task reminded me of how much I had lost. I couldn't cook, couldn't clean, couldn't even hold a cup without help. But I tried, I really did. I wanted to prove that I could still be more than the broken person they saw. Whenever Darren needed money, he came to me. "You've got savings, right?" he'd say carelessly. "Dad probably left you something." When I refused, his face twisted in frustration. "You're just being selfish. You think you're better than us now because you got hurt." Before I could respond, Martha would step in, siding with him instantly. "Don't talk to your brother like that, Alina. He's doing his best. Give him what he needs." Sometimes I wondered if she even saw me as her daughter anymore. My father's death had not softened her. It had hardened her. Her resentment had turned into something darker, disgust. Every glance she gave me carried the unspoken thought, "You're no longer useful." Nights were the hardest. I often sat alone in the living room, my laptop resting on its silver stand beside the couch. It had become the only thing that made me feel human again. I couldn't type fast, but I could still use voice commands, watch old movies, and escape for a while into stories that weren't mine. The soft light of the screen was the only warmth that filled that house. But Martha didn't even let that small comfort be mine. "Electricity isn't free," she snapped one evening when she saw me watching something. "If you can't work, at least stop wasting power." She stormed off, muttering about how my father had spoiled me. The tension grew thicker each day. I could feel something building, a quiet storm waiting to break. Darren spent his days sleeping, his nights drinking with friends, coming home smelling of beer. Martha defended him every time. I was the outsider now, trapped in the same walls my father once promised would protect me. Late one night, as I lay awake listening to the ticking of the clock, I realized something painful but true. My father's death hadn't just taken him away. It had taken away the only shield that stood between me and their cruelty. Without him, I was completely alone in this house. It happened on a cold evening, about 2 months after my father's funeral. The house was filled with the kind of silence that usually comes before something terrible. I had just finished eating dinner. A simple bowl of soup I'd managed to pour for myself using a spoon attached to a strap around my arm. Darren was in his room, playing loud music, and Martha sat on the couch watching television, her expression distant but tense. I tried to keep my distance from both of them. Every conversation ended in bitterness. But that night, Martha seemed angrier than usual. The mail had come earlier in the day. Bills, late notices, and something from the insurance company that must have upset her. I could hear her muttering, her voice dripping with resentment. "If your father hadn't wasted money on that lawyer, maybe we wouldn't be in this mess." I knew exactly what she was talking about. The house, the one my father had transferred to my name. I kept quiet, hoping to avoid another argument, but silence was never enough for Martha. She turned toward me suddenly, eyes blazing. "You think you're smart, don't you? Sitting there like a victim, acting helpless while living under my roof." I looked up at her calmly and said, "It's not your roof, Mom. It's mine. Dad made sure of that." Those words hit her harder than I expected. She froze for a second. Then her face twisted with rage I had never seen before. "What did you just say?" she hissed, rising from the couch. I tried to explain, but she didn't want explanations. "You think you can take this house from me? You crippled little ingrate." Before I could move, she looked around the room in fury. Her eyes landed on the silver laptop stand sitting beside the coffee table, the one I used every night to watch movies or take online therapy sessions. In one swift motion, she grabbed it with both hands, raised it above her head, and swung it down toward me with all her strength. I screamed and twisted away. The metal frame struck my lower back instead of my head, sending a sharp wave of pain shooting through my spine. I stumbled and fell to the floor, gasping. "Martha, stop," I cried. "Please." But she wasn't listening. Darren rushed in from his room, not to help me, but to grab me by the shoulders and drag me toward the front door. "Get out," he shouted. "You hurt her. We don't need you here." My body hit the cold porch tiles as the door slammed behind me. My voice broke as I screamed for help, my breath visible in the freezing night air. Across the street, the porch light from Harold and Nora's house flicked on. The door opened, and I saw their shocked faces. Nora gasped and ran inside to grab her phone. Within minutes, the sound of sirens echoed through the neighborhood. As the blue and red lights approached, I lay trembling in the snow, pain radiating through my back, but deep down, I knew something had finally changed. They couldn't hide their cruelty anymore. The freezing air bit into my skin as I lay outside on the porch, unable to move. My back throbbed from where the metal laptop stand had struck, and the shock of it left me trembling uncontrollably. My breath came out in sharp bursts, visible in the night air like small ghosts. I could hear muffled voices from inside, Martha yelling something at Darren, the sound of footsteps pacing, and then the door slamming again. Across the street, the porch light from Harold and Nora's house stayed on. A moment later, their door opened, and both of them hurried outside. Nora, dressed in her robe, gasped when she saw me lying there. "Oh my God, Alina," she shouted, rushing forward. Harold stopped her, his hand raised. "Call 911 first," he said firmly. His voice was calm, but urgent. He pulled off his coat and placed it gently over my shoulders while Nora spoke quickly to the dispatcher. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens filled the quiet neighborhood. The sound grew louder until flashing red and blue lights danced across the front of the house. The police cruiser stopped at the curb, followed by an ambulance. 2 officers rushed up the steps while the paramedics came behind with a stretcher. "Ma'am, are you hurt anywhere else?" one officer asked, kneeling beside me. I nodded weakly. They hit me," I whispered. "My mom and brother. They threw me out." The officer exchanged a look with his partner. "Stay still. We're going to take care of you." Then he turned toward the door and pounded on it. "Cleveland Police. Open up." No response. After a few seconds, the officer signaled to the other, and with one solid kick, they broke the lock and burst inside. The next moments were filled with shouts, Martha screaming, Darren protesting, and then the clatter of handcuffs snapping shut. Meanwhile, the paramedics lifted me carefully onto the stretcher. Nora stood by the door, tears in her eyes, whispering, "You're safe now, sweetheart. It's over." Before they wheeled me away, I saw one of the officers carrying the silver laptop stand out of the house, tagging it as evidence. It looked harmless in his hands, yet I knew it carried the weight of everything that had broken inside that home. As the ambulance doors closed and the vehicle pulled away, I watched the flashing lights fade in the distance. For the first time in years, I felt something close to relief, not because I was free, but because the truth had finally been seen. The trial began 3 months after the attack. By then, I had recovered enough to attend the hearings in person, though the weight of everything that had happened still clung to me. My bandaged arms rested on a cushioned sling, and my lawyer, Miss Peterson, sat beside me, her voice steady and calm. The courtroom in downtown Cleveland was quiet, the kind of silence that demands attention. When the bailiff called out, "All rise," I saw Martha and Darren for the first time since that night. My mother looked older, her face pale and drawn, but her eyes still carried defiance. Darren stood beside her, trying to look confident, though he kept shifting uncomfortably. They were both wearing the same arrogance I'd grown up with, the belief that no matter what they did, they'd get away with it. The prosecutor began by laying out the facts, the assault, the forced eviction, the witnesses, and the police report. Officer Daniels, one of the first responders, testified about finding me outside in freezing weather, injured and trembling, and discovering the silver laptop stand lying on the living room floor. It had a small dent on one corner, proof of where it had struck. Next came Nora and Harold. Nora's voice trembled as she described the moment she saw me lying on the porch. She was crying, she said softly, her eyes filling with tears. Her mother and brother threw her out like she was nothing. No one should treat their own child that way. Harold nodded beside her, adding, I've lived in that neighborhood 30 years. I've never seen anything so cruel. When it was time for me to speak, my heart pounded, but I knew I had to tell my story. I explained how my father had left the house in my name, how my mother and brother resented it, and how that resentment turned into violence. My voice shook, but I didn't cry. I wanted the court to hear strength, not weakness. Martha's defense tried to argue that it was an accident, that she had lost control in grief, that she didn't mean to hurt me. But the prosecutor was relentless. Your client didn't just lose control, she said firmly. She struck her disabled daughter with a metal object and ordered her son to throw her outside. That's not grief. That's cruelty. The jury deliberated for almost 2 hours before returning. I held my breath as the foreperson stood. We find the defendant, Martha Lewis, guilty on all charges: assault and battery, abuse of a dependent adult, and unlawful eviction. We find the co-defendant, Darren Lewis, guilty of aiding and abetting assault. The judge's voice was steady as she read the sentences. Martha Lewis is hereby sentenced to 8 years in state prison and required to complete mandatory anger management counseling upon release. Darren Lewis is sentenced to 4 years in prison with 3 years of supervised probation. The courtroom was silent. Martha shouted something as she was handcuffed, but her voice faded as the officers led her away. When the judge turned to me, her tone softened. Ms. Lewis, the court acknowledges your strength and resilience. The property deed is confirmed under your legal ownership. You are also granted a permanent protective order against both defendants. As I left the courtroom, sunlight poured through the tall windows, the first light I had noticed in months. I stepped outside, breathing in the cold Cleveland air. Justice hadn't erased the pain, but it had given me something I thought I'd lost forever: a sense of safety and a chance to start over. Spring arrived slowly in Cleveland, melting away the last traces of snow that had lingered since winter. The neighborhood looked different now, not because it had changed, but because I had. The same streets that once felt like traps now felt like proof that I had survived them. After the trial, I moved back into the house my father had given me, my house. The silence inside was no longer heavy or cruel. It was peaceful, like the calm that follows a storm. At first, I didn't know what to do with myself. The routines I used to live by, work, caretaking, constant sacrifice, were gone. I spent weeks in therapy, both physical and emotional, learning how to navigate life with prosthetic attachments and adaptive tools. The pain was constant, but so was the determination. Every morning, I remembered my father's words, "You're stronger than you think." One afternoon, while sorting through his old things, I found a notebook filled with his handwriting. Inside were sketches and ideas, plans for a small community center he had once dreamed of building for injured workers. My eyes welled up as I traced the faded ink with the edge of my sleeve. That was the moment I knew what I needed to do. With help from a local nonprofit and my lawyer, I began transforming our old house into something new, a place of hope. The living room became an office space. My father's old bedroom turned into a small therapy room. On the sign above the door, painted in bold blue letters, I wrote, "Franklin Family Care and Recovery Center." It started small, just a few visitors each week. People who had been through workplace injuries, amputations, or disabilities like mine came to talk, share stories, and rebuild their confidence. Some needed resources. Others just needed someone who understood. I couldn't hold their hands, but I could offer something else: compassion, guidance, and proof that healing was possible. Word spread quickly through Cleveland's working-class neighborhoods. The center became a symbol of strength, not just for me, but for anyone who had been broken and left behind. We partnered with hospitals, arranged counseling programs, and provided job training for disabled individuals. Every success story that walked out of that door felt like another heartbeat of my father's legacy. Sometimes, when I sat by the window in the evenings, watching the sunset over the rooftops, I imagined him sitting beside me, smiling the same soft smile he always did. I would whisper, "We did it, Dad." Your house became more than a home. It became a second chance. I no longer measured my worth by what I could hold or lift. My strength wasn't in my hands anymore. It was in the lives I touched, in the courage I carried, and in the faith that pain doesn't have to be the end of the story. Because this life rebuilt from loss was not a tragedy. It was a beginning. Thank you for watching this story. If you felt inspired by Alina's journey of strength and justice, make sure to like this video to support the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I always love hearing what you think and how our story made you feel. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next powerful story we bring to life. Your support helps keep these real, emotional stories reaching more people every day.